Chapter 7. 5 weeks later, I was ready. That is to say, in the eyes of Ferndale Hall, I was ready to go to boarding school. And in my own mind, I was ready for a venture of quite a different sort. Regarding boarding school, the seamstress had arrived from London, settled herself in a long vacant room once occupied by a lady's maid, sighed over the long treadle, sewing machine, and then taken my measurements. Waist 20 inches. Too large. Chest 21 inches. Far too small. Hips 22 inches. Dreadfully inadequate. But all could be set right. In a fashionable publication my mother would never have allowed in Ferndale Hall, the seamstress located the following advertisement. Amplifier, ideal corset for perfecting thin figures. Words cannot describe its charming effect, which is unapproachable and unattainable by any other corset in the world. Softly padded regulators inside, with other improvements combining softness, lightness, and comfort. Regulated wearer's pleasure, any desired fullness with the graceful curves of a beautifully proportioned bust. Corset sent on approval in plain parcel on receipt of remittance. Guaranteed. Money returned if not satisfied. Avoid worthless substitutes. This device was duly ordered, and the seamstress began to produce prim, dim-coloured dresses with high whalebone-ribbed collars to strangle me, waistbands designed to choke my breath, and skirts which spread over half a dozen flounced silk petticoats trailed on the floor so that I could barely walk. She proposed to sew 2 dresses with a 19.5-inch waist, then 2 with a 19-inch waist, and so on to 18.5 inches and smaller, in expectation that as I grew, I would diminish. Meanwhile, increasingly terse telegrams from Sherlock Holmes reported no word of Mother. He had tracked down her old friends, her fellow artists, her suffragist associates. He had even travelled to France to check with her distant relations, the Vernets, but all to no avail. I had begun to feel afraid for Mother again. Why had the great detective not been able to locate her? Might some accident have befallen her after all? Or even worse, some foul crime? My thinking changed, however, upon the day the seamstress completed the first dress, at which time I was expected to put on the ideal corset, which had arrived, as promised, in discreet brown paper wrappings, with frontal and lateral regulators, plus, of course, a patent dress improver, so that never again would my back be able to rest against that of any chair I sat on. Also, I was expected to wear my hair in a chignon, secured with hairpins that dug into my scalp, with a fringe of false curls around my forehead, similarly skewed. As my reward, I got to put on my new dress, and, in new shoes, just as torturous, toddle around the hall to practice being a young lady. That day I realized, with a rational yet complete certainty, where my mother had gone. Some place where there were no hairpins, no corsets, ideal or otherwise, and no patent dress improvers. Meanwhile, Brother Mycroft sent a telegram reporting that all was arranged. I was to present myself at such and such, a finishing school, House of Horrors, on such and such a date, and instructed Lane to see to my getting there. More importantly, regarding my own venture, I spent my days as much as I could in a dressing gown, keeping to my room and napping, pleading nervous prostration. Mrs. Lane, who frequently offered me calves' foot jelly, and the like, small wonder invalids wasted away, grew so worried that she communicated with Mycroft, who assured her that boarding school, where it would breakfast upon oatmeal and wear wool next to my skin, would restore my health. Nevertheless, she summoned first the local apothecary, and later a Harley Street physician all the way from London, neither of whom found anything wrong with me. Correctly enough, I was simply avoiding corsets, hairpins, tight shoes, and the like, while making up for lost sleep. No one knew that every night, after I had heard the rest of the household go to bed, I got up and worked on my cipher book throughout the dark hours. I enjoyed the ciphers after all, for I loved finding things, and Mum's ciphers gave me a new way to do this. First discovering the hidden meaning, then the treasure. Each cipher I unraveled led me into Mum's rooms in search of more riches she had secreted for me. Some of the ciphers I could not solve, which frustrated me so that I considered ripping the backing of all of Mum's watercolors, but that hardly seemed sporting. Also, there were many too many pictures, and therefore not all the ciphers directed me to them. There was, for instance, a page in my cipher book decorated with ivy trailing along a picket fence. At once, without even looking at the cipher, I stole into Mother's rooms in search for a watercolor study of ivy. I found two and ripped the backing off both without success before I rather sullenly returned to my room and faced the cipher. AOEOLIMESOKLNKONYDBBN. What in the world? I looked up ivy and the meaning of flowers. The clinging vine stood for a fidelity. Although touching this knowledge did not help me. I scoured at the cipher for a while before I was able to pick up my name in the first three letters of the top line combined with the first three letters of the bottom line. Then I noticed how Mum had painted the ivy, zigzagging in rather unnatural manner, up and down the picket fence. Also, the ivy grew from right to left. Rolling my eyes, I followed the same pattern and rewrote the cipher. KNOBSBEDMYINLOOKENOLA. Nob's bed, my in look Enola. Or reading the words from right to left, Enola, look in my bed knobs. Off I went, tiptoeing through the night, to remove the knobs from Mum's bed, and discovered that an astonishing amount of paper money can be stuffed inside brass bed knobs. I, in my turn, had to find clever hiding places within my bedroom, so that Mrs. Lane's occasional invasions with dustcloth would discover nothing. My curtain rods, made of brass like Mother's bed, with knobs on either end, served the purpose. And all of this had to be done before the Lanes rose at dawn. Altogether, my nights were far more active and satisfactory than my days. I did not even find what I most desired, any note of farewell, affectionate regard, or explanation from Mum. But truly, at this point, not much explanation was needed. I knew that she had practiced her deceptions for my sake, at least in part, and I knew that the money she had so cleverly slipped to me was meant to give me freedom. Thanks to Mum, therefore, it was in surprisingly hopeful, if nervous state of mind that, one sunny morning in late August, I mounted to the seat of the conveyance that was to take me away from the only home that I had ever known. Lane had arranged with the local farmer for the loan of a horse and a kind of hybrid contraption, or trap, a luggage wagon with an upholstered seat for me and the driver. I was to travel to the railway station in comfort, if not in style. I hope it doesn't rain, Mrs. Lane remarked, standing in the drive to see me off. It hadn't rained in weeks, not since the day I had gone searching for my mother. Unlikely, said Lane, giving me his hand so that I could step up to my seat like a lady, one kid-gloved hand in his, while the other lifted my white ruffled parasol. There's not a cloud in the sky. Smiling down on Lane and Mrs. Lane, I settled first my bustle, then myself, next to Dick, my driver. Just as my bustle occupied the back of the seat, Mrs. Lane had arranged my hair to occupy the back of my head, as was the fashion, so that my hat, rather like a berry ribbon, straw dinner plate, tilted forward over my eyes. I wore a taupe suit. I had chosen carefully for its nondescript, indeed ugly color, its 19.5-inch waistband, full skirt and concealing jacket. Beneath the jacket I had left the skirt's waistband unbuttoned, so that I could corset myself as lightly as possible, also comfortably. I could breathe, as would be needful very soon. You look every inch a lady, Mrs. Nola, said Lane, standing back. You'll be a credit to Ferndale Hall, I'm sure. Little did he know. We'll miss you, quavered Mrs. Lane, and for a moment my heart reproached me, for I saw tears on her soft old face. Thank you, I said rather stiffly, starching myself against my emotion. Dick, drive on. All the way to the gate I stared at the horse's ears. My brother Mycroft had hired men to clean up the lawn of the estate, and I did not want to see it with my wild rose bushes cut down. Goodbye, Miss Enola, and good luck, said the lodge-keeper, as he opened the gates for us. Thank you, Cooper. As the horse trotted through Kindford, I sighed and allowed my glance to roam, taking a farewell look at the butcher's shop, the greengrocer's shop, the black-beamed, whitewashed thatched cottages, public house, post and telegraph office, constabulary, more Tudor cottages with tiny windows scowling under the heavy straw forelocks, the inn, the smithy, the vicarage, the granite chapel with its mossy slate roof, headstones tilting this way and that in the graveyard. I let us trot almost past before I said suddenly, as if I had just the moment thought of it, "Dick, stop. I wish to say good-bye to my father." He pulled the horse to a halt. "What was that, Miss Enola?" When dealing with Dick, full and simple explanations were necessary. "I wish to visit my father's grave," I told him, one patient word at a time, "and say a prayer for him in the chapel." Poor father, he would not have desired such prayers. As a logician and an unbeliever, Mum had once told me he had not desired a funeral. His request had been for cremation, but after his demise his wishes had been overruled, for fear that Kindford might never recover from the scandal. In a slow, worried way, Dick said, "I'm to drive you to the railway station, miss. There's plenty of time. You can have a pint at the public house while you're waiting for me." "Oh, eh!" He turned the horse, backtracked, and drew up at the door of the chapel. We sat for a moment before he remembered his manners, but then he secured the reins, got down, and came around to my side to help me descend. "Thank you," I told him, as I withdrew my gloved hand from his grubby fist. "Come back for me in 10 minutes." Nonsense. I knew he'd be half an hour or more in the public house. "Yes, miss." He touched his cap. He drove away, and amid a swirl of skirts, I minced into the chapel. As I had expected and hoped, I found it unoccupied. After scanning the empty pews, I grinned, tossed my parasol into the cast-off clothing for the poor box, hoisted my skirts above my knees, and dashed for the back door, and out into the sunlit graveyard. Down a twisting path worn between the tottering grey headstones, I ran, keeping the chapel between me and any witness who might be passing upon the village street. When I reached the hedge at the bottom of the chapel grounds, I leapt more than climbed the stile, turned right, ran a bit further, and yes, indeed, there waited my bicycle, hidden in the hedge where I had left it yesterday, or rather, yesternight, in the small hours by the light of a nearly full moon. On the bicycle were mounted 2 containers, a basket in front and a box in back, both packed full of sandwiches, pickles, hard-boiled eggs, water flask, bandaging in case of an accident, tire repair kit, knickerbockers, my comfortable old black boots, toothbrush, and such. On my person also were mounted 2 containers, hidden beneath the top suit, one in front and one in back. The one in front was a quite unique bust enhancer that I had secretly hand-sewn for myself, out of materials purloined from Mum's wardrobe. For the container in back, I had devised a dress improver of sort. Why, leaving home, had my mum worn a bustle, yet left its horsehair stuffing behind? The answer seemed obvious to me. In order to conceal in the dress improver's place the baggage necessary for running away. And I, being blessed with a flat chest, had carried her example a step further. My various and proper regulators, enhancers, and improvers remained in Ferndale Hall, stuffed up in my chimney, actually. In their places upon my person I wore clothes containers, baggage, in effect, filled with unmentionables wrapped around bundles of banknotes. In addition, I had folded a carefully chosen spare dress and secured it in my back between my petticoats, where it perfectly filled my train. In the pockets of my suit I had a handkerchief, a cake of soap, comb, and a hairbrush, my now precious booklet of ciphers, smelling salts, energy-sustaining candies. Indeed, I bore a steamer's trunks worth of essentials. Hopping onto my bicycle, letting my petticoats and skirts modestly drape my ankles, I pedalled off across country. A good cyclist does not need a road. I would follow the farm lanes and pasture lands for the time being. The ground was baked hard as iron. I would leave no tracks. By tomorrow, I imagined my brother, the great detective Sherlock Holmes, would be attempting to locate a missing sister as well as a missing mother. He would expect me to flee from him, therefore I would not. I would flee towards him. He lived in London. So did Mycroft. On that account, and also because it was the world's largest and most dangerous city, it was the last place on earth either of them would expect me to venture. Therefore, I would go there. They would be expecting me to disguise myself as a boy. Very likely they had heard about my knickerbockers, And anyway, in Shakespeare and other works of fiction, runaway girls always disguise themselves as boys. Therefore, I would not. I would disguise myself as the last things my brothers would think I could be, having met me as a plain beanpole of a child in a frock that barely covered my knees. I would disguise myself as a grown woman, and then I would set out about finding my mother.